forming states, you guys learn in sixth or seventh grade about Mesopotamia and the Fertile Crescent. You know, a lot of it was about trade. A lot of it was about military conquest. All right, but Europe, next year, you're going to find how crazy it was because it's pretty small there. You've got all these competing, kingdoms. And, we'll talk a lot about the Netherlands, all right, which we know as Holland, all right? And this has traded hands so many times. It's low, it's right next to the ocean, it's got ports, and everybody's wanted it. And when you take history next year, you're gonna go, what, the Spanish had it? It was basically traded off from kingdom to kingdom. The Romans were there, the Franks were there, which were the French, and it's gone hand to hand. But the Netherlands, that's where it got its name back during that Spanish conquest, but it's also, we know, the Holland, and they are the Dutch. But you're going to see all sorts of little subtleties like that when you're in Europe. It's like, what are these people doing here? A lot of conquest was going on. And then after World War II, what's going to happen is they try to fix it a lot after the Treaty of Versailles in World War I, but World War II, it's like, okay, let's try to get an ethnic group in their country so we don't have future wars. But what really is going to keep them out of future wars is not so much cleaner boundaries, is they start trading with each other. And once you start trading with each other, you stop fighting each other.
Okay, for this one, we're going to have to get all prehistoric on your butts. Okay, so imagine your ancestors. They're walking around, their knuckles are dragging on the ground, they have sloped foreheads, okay? And they spend 95% of their day looking for food, looking for calories, or trying to avoid things that will kill them. So 95% of their time is just essentially trying to stay alive. Okay? That's how life is for humans on planet Earth for most of the existence of time. Okay? Now, something massive changes, right? We're going to talk about the agricultural revolution. We're going to talk about that in the next unit. But where all of that takes place, where all that happens is here in the Fertile Crescent, okay? So you can see it's called a crescent. It's a crescent, like a crescent moon, okay? But the most important word on this slide is fertile or fertile, okay? So fertile because three major rivers, the Nile, the Tigris, and the Euphrates. Civilizations spring up here. Why is that? Well, it's fertile, which means that they can grow food. And anytime you have an abundance of food, you don't have to spend 95% of your day trying to find enough calories to stay alive. So what does that mean? That means excess time. So this is where we see the first religions being born that are really organized type religions. But this is also where we see the first states. If you think about it, you have an abundance of goods, abundance of food. So in order to organize that, in order to orchestrate that, there has to be someone in charge, someone who has maybe more power, more access than other people. And so we start to see society, social hierarchies develop here, okay? These early cities, they're called city-states, okay? You guys might know like Clash of Clans, okay? So you have your little city, you have your wall around your city, okay? And you're protecting from other city-states that might come in and try to, hurt your people or take your abundance of stuff. And then beyond that, there's agricultural land where you're harvesting all that food. But then it also acts as a buffer against other city-states that might try to come in. Okay, so early states, city-states. Now we still have some city-states today. Okay, that just really modern city-states are a little bit different. Okay, but the idea is the same, that the city is so huge and so powerful that it's almost like a state. Okay? Now, going forward in time, we're going to talk about unity. The Roman Empire, one state, okay, many ethnicities. So just take a look at the boundaries here. Okay? You've got Northern Africa, okay, all the way to Egypt, Arabia, Syria. You got Turkey, okay, cruising all the way over here, in Macedonia, Italy, France, up to Britain, Spain. Think of how many different ethnicities are incorporated underneath that one empire, okay? It's multi-ethnic, right? And this is the first real huge unified state. Now, the way that they spread their empire, or expanded their influence, was they used their army. And so what they would do is, in the frontiers, they would put their armies in these frontier lands. They would conquer a local tribe, and they would usually put someone in charge, maybe someone who is a local ruler. They sometimes would allow them to keep parts of their language, even though everyone had to learn Latin. Remember, we talked about lingua franca. We talked about Latin being sort of a unifying force here, right? A centripetal force, bringing people together, okay? And those of you who remember 7th grade history, you guys remember that it falls in the 5th century when they sort of overextend themselves, okay? So you see that Rome is kind of the center of everything. They're sending out weapons and supplies to these far-reaching areas, and the Roman Empire is weakest at its frontier level. But when the Germanic tribes attack, they can't hold them off, okay? And so that, plus the fact that you have a lot of infighting in Rome, et tu, Brutai, okay? The Roman Empire falls around the 5th century BC. So it's at this time that we see the feudal states developing, okay? That's when Emperor Constantine takes the empire, the Roman Empire, and he moves it east, okay? That's where we start to see Orthodox Christianity springing up, okay? It becomes Constantinople. Later it's Istanbul, right? But it's in Turkey there, okay? The rest of Europe, the western parts of Europe, if you have land, you have power. So this is where we start to see dukes, nobles, eventually kings and queens starting to develop. Okay, so all that feudal society where you think of, I think of Robin Hood, right? He was robbing the rich and giving to the poor. Well, why is that such a powerful story? It's because it's true, because there were people who had a lot and then people who have very, very little. So you start to see more and more of that stratification of society. You see the breaking up of all of that Roman territory, and look at how diverse it is, okay? Now, Mr. Wright, on the next slide, he's going to talk about some of the families that join together and start to pool their resources.
So you go from all these little principalities to basically you're getting stronger rulers that are starting to conquer, and you see areas of influence expanding, and they're just incorporating all of these people around them. The French, they used to be very separate with they were very regional. Like we said, Napoleon's going to bring them together. All right, and you just see this happening all over. Austria expands. They're going into Eastern Europe. The Ottoman Empire down low. There's the Serbs and the Croats and the Bosnians. They can have conflict with each other because they're controlled by the Ottomans, and their conflict is with that oppressor, with the Ottomans. They're not fighting amongst themselves. We've talked about Spain before being very different with the Catalans, with the Basques, with the Galatians. All right, they're going to come together into one country. Okay, all right. Now, we see this changing a little bit. I'm going to go on. 1924. Okay, good. Let's go back. Okay, so after World War I, what's going to happen is at the Treaty of Versailles, they tried to clean up the map based on linguistics, based on languages. And we talked before about a united Slavia. All right, the old Ottoman Empire is gone. Hey, let's put all the Slavic languages together, or a lot of them in this one country. And that's actually going to create a problem because all of those little groups are going to fight with each other eventually over who has control of the area. It's not going to happen for a few decades. All right, but you can see different areas are set up, based on languages. Like if we look at this next one, you can see that Denmark. How does Denmark get Greenland? And I'm not even sure how. Do you know how the story goes? How they got Denmark?
I know that the Queen of Denmark is the one who is in charge of Greenland, and I think that just kind of like how President Trump offered to buy Greenland. I think that Denmark basically offered to buy Greenland, and Greenland's like, okay, you guys got some resources. We'll listen to you.
Well, what's interesting right now is it's always just been some little fishing villages. There's some oil. But underneath all of that ice is precious metals, that in your cell phones and whatnot. And President Trump offered to buy this recently, and everybody thought he was crazy. Well, the ice is melting, and now you can get to all these precious metals. All right. Okay. All righty. So self-determination, as we mentioned, Yugoslavia, different ethnic groups are going to want their own boundaries and have their own states. All right. And let's clean this up a little between multinational and multi-ethnic. With multi-ethnics, stick with Canada, the United States, and we talked about Russia. And then multinational, all right, let's go with the UK. Okay, that's what we're talking about, the English, the Scottish, the Welsh, and the Irish.
So the green areas, it says ethnic diversity, most diverse. Okay, so we've talked about Africa being the most ethnically diverse and linguistically diverse on the planet. Okay, but one thing I forgot to mention to you guys is sometimes they'll mention, what is the future of the United Nations? And we talked about counting states. Well, currently we're just north of 200 states. But what they predict is going to happen is there's going to be more states that are going to be added to the United Nations. And the reason is because of self-determination. So if you think about, we talked about Spain, we talked about Catalonia, right? And the idea that the Catalans want to create their own state. Well, potentially, if that happens, they could be added to the United Nations and we have a new state. Okay, same thing with Galicia, right? And various regions. Even Quebec, right, has talked about self-determination. So the idea that we might grow in terms of numbers of states in the world, it's possible. It's very possible. Okay, so we're going to talk about multi-ethnic. Africa, even the United States, is multi-ethnic. We talk about nation states. And really, truly, I don't think there is a true nation state in the world. There's no state that's 100%, one ethnicity. Even Japan, there's a small percentage of Koreans, but a nation state means like the majority is going to be that one ethnicity. Okay, so most places in the world are multi-ethnic states. Okay, now multinational states. Mr. Wright mentioned the United Kingdom. Okay, that's a really good example because, within, we sometimes talk about England and then all of a sudden you're like, wait, is it England or the United Kingdom? Okay, it's a good question. Okay, because, and the reason why we get confused is because it is a multinational state. You've got the Welsh right over here. You've got the Scots and the Northern Irish up here, and then you've got England proper. Okay, so former Yugoslavia under Tito, okay, this was a multinational state. Bunch of different nations all coexisting together. They recognized each other, okay, but they were okay. They existed until they didn't, right? When Tito dies, and then you have the breakup of all these different countries. Okay, now an example, Czechoslovakia is another example, but the Czechoslovakia, okay, you can see the Czech Republic here and Prague is a super cool city. I highly recommend go to Prague, okay? Really interesting. Kafka, okay, was born there. So you've got the Czech Republic here, you've got Slovakia here, and they were, Czechoslovakia, and they were really kind of like a peaceful split, okay, when it all came down, okay? So I think this one is showing us the German population divided between East and West Germany, and eventually it's reunited. So I guess East and West Germany at some point, I don't know, that would be a multinational state, okay, until they're reunified. All right, moving forward, this is a microstate. This is Nauru, okay, one of a lot of different microstates. We'll talk about Liechtenstein, that's a microstate. Andorra would be another one, Vatican City. Okay, and I think what they're trying to point out to us here in this slide is the impact of global warming on small island, states. Okay, so since 1850, every year since 1850 has been the warmest year on record. Okay, so what does that mean? That means that the planet continues to heat up. So what does that mean? That means that the sea levels are rising. Okay, when the sea levels are rising, I think it was something like, it was like 6.7 centimeters, right, in the 1900s, okay? And so what happens is those coastline starts to disappear, and then there start to become issues for the people who live on these islands in these small areas.